So we do hear, at least from the government side, that as a Western government, let's say, they believe in the process of democratization, which practically doesn't exist in Zimbabwe right now. They pretty much have a dictatorship scenario, right? And we also get, and we kind of also agree, even being the opposition, that the people in Zimbabwe are the vulnerable target group people that we're talking about, right? At the end of the day, the idea is to make sure that these people who are suffering, who probably cannot have the correct living conditions, so basically living in these corruption that thinks the country, a situation develops much better, that kind of translates into better reforms, economic, land, name it whatever, that kind of translates into better living conditions, better jobs for the country at large. So all that sounds really good, but what the government kind of proposes um, by lifting up the sanction is probably more of a short-term, let's say, a benefit that they kind of foresee, but they don't really tackle the problem. I'll come to that as one of my arguments. Now, let's first understand what exactly is the situation right now in Zimbabwe, right? So we still have the same ruling party. We just have a new president who basically still shares the same values of the party, right? It's still kind of the same dictator. So typically, the status quo hasn't really changed as such in Zimbabwe. So you just have with respect to all the land and all the corruption and the wealth inequality and jobs, the situation or the scenario is kind of pretty much the same. So Zimbabwe, as system, it still remains as one dominant dictatorship government, or even if you have like a pseudo-democratic kind of gives an impression, there is an opposition which is not even right now credible enough if not given the right support, which we as a Western government are trying to do. We know in Zimbabwe there have been referendums, but there has never been a fair election that has been held, right? Democracy as such does not exist in Zimbabwe, and that is right now the status quo. Now, as a Western government, what we want to do is if we can, as the motion already suggests, if we can bolster the opposition, right, it's important for a proper functioning of a democracy, which even the government also does support. They say we should have a democratic system. So if there is no credible opposition that can actually challenge, now it's a very simple idea, right? Why having an opposition is good. It's not that always the opposition or the government are probably right or wrong, right? But the idea is to counter check, right? The idea is if one tries to do something that seems pretty crazy, at least as another check that kind of tries to put it down, right? If even if there are, let's say, two corrupt sides working, at least one says at least one can function in a less corrupt way, and one can function in a let's say, tries to promote even working in a lesser corrupt way, so bidding, let's put it that way. So having an opposition puts on a system of self-check, or let's say a counter-check, which at least helps in having a better democratic system. And that is exactly what we right now need in Zimbabwe. So the problem is that the people in Zimbabwe are actually facing is cannot just be simply solved by sanction. Now, it's very easy to kind of somehow think if we lift up the sanctions. Now, let's say, for an example, we do lift it up, right? So what happens? You have some international funding coming in. It's a no-brainer to kind of understand there'll be some jobs created. There will be some new, and no, thank you. There will be some there's influx of funds. Everything seems nice and flowery for long, but if technically the government and the system is unchanged, right? In the long term, what seems right now to be a short-term benefit is still going to go and get into the old ways of doing things, right? If there is corruption already in the system, if there is no opposition, if the inequality that is still there kind of does exist, the entire situation or the problem doesn't change. So eventually, what right now seems like a good thing, and people probably get in some extra money, thank you right now, I'll take in a minute. These people are eventually going to get back into that same loop. So what is essential? Because we understand that as a Western government, as a Western countries, we do have a determining power, right? We do have the power in order to influence how Zimbabwe can function. And what we believe is right now, it's better to keep on with these sanctions, even if we have a new president, and rather not support them, because now this president kind of realizes that he just doesn't get it for free, right? He has to perform. He has to deliver in order to get the support from the Western countries. Only then, if we believe that he can prove the performance, only then he can deliver and he can work for the Zimbabwe people, because ultimately that is the people's life that we're all trying to improve. Then only then can we try in, let's say, removing this. Okay,
which specific opposition leader would you support and why?
Right. Okay. So maybe I think that POI will be can be taken up by my partner because that's pretty much which is our next part of the discussion on how as Western government we pick up the opposition. So I think I'll let him do that part of the talk. Um, so okay. Pretty much lost where I was. Um, yeah. So pretty. What was the last thing? Okay, yeah. So as I said, pretty much we understand as Western countries, we do have the determining power, right? We know Zimbabwe needs us. And because they need us, because we do have the potential of giving them that enough funding, giving them that enough resources, which we can actually use as a power in a much more better way in order to improve. And because see, the idea is not just to give right now the money and make certain things flowery for short term, right? The idea is if we want this country to be a functioning country in the long term, then we need to have a more long-sighted, let's say, kind of a strategy, right? So we believe when we do have the power, why not implement it in the right way? We are not saying we're never going to remove the sanctions, right? But we're saying right now it's definitely not the good time because the status quo hasn't changed. The government hasn't yet performed. The government hasn't delivered yet in order to win our trust, let's say that way, so that we can let the funding flow. And that is why we basically want to make sure that if we can at least create a system enough by putting the pressure, by putting the force, then we can at least have an opposition that's credible enough to at least counter check, at least to kind of, try to say that, okay, if this does, you have to do it, and if this doesn't work. We believe that gives things a much more on a fair scale, on a fair makes the system much more fair than what it is, right? It doesn't make the system perfect. We're not even trying to claim that, right? We just say if you compare to the status quo, it makes it a bit better, right? And at least that situation makes things much more credible, a better situation at least for the country in general to progress at large.
I'd like to leave off this for a fine speed and invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue
So I'll have 4 points of substantive. I'll explain those in a second after my rebuttal. So it's like three things points of rebuttal. First of all, it's the same party. Like, yeah, it's pretty much the same system, but but this just shows that sanctions did not get rid of Mugabe. They probably will not get rid of the bloke who you believe is essentially his successor, right? At best, you have shown that like your world is identical to the world we are currently living in, but with a different face. Second point of rebuttal. This like weird fluffy dismissal of some jobs, right? Like, okay, you can fluffily dismiss some jobs when we're talking about like Port Talbot, Wales. When we're talking about a country with like widespread absolute poverty, yeah, like some jobs, giving people an income stream and allowing them to provide for themselves in a basic way is a very important thing in this debate. And given that Side government has conceded this, we think that this certainty of like some jobs and some economic prosperity being created is a point that comes to our side, because everything else in this debate is essentially uncertain and contested. This has been conceded by the party. And like not the party, like the opposition. And finally, like the idea that we're comparing status quo. Like nobody in this debate is talking about status quo. We are both doing something distinctly different to status quo. The fact you are better than status quo, if you are, does not necessarily mean you won the debate. Actually, you're also better than our world. Okay, a few points of substantive. So first of all, why specifically the West needs to do this? Why sanctions are terrible generally, and in this specific scenario. Why like a development of some kind of liberal values is likely and good, and like what would happen even if sanctions did lead to some kind of nominal democracy. So first of all, very briefly, why specifically the West? This hasn't been challenged yet, but if it does, I'll preempt that. So specifically the West, 4 reasons. Like the West, as in like sort of former colonial powers, is generally the reason that Zimbabwe, which we formerly invaded and called Rhodesia, is not doing great. Secondly, like we have the resources to do this. Thirdly, like we are the ones currently doing a lot of sanctioning. And fourth, like we are a body of countries that are all, to some extent at least, democratic. Those are the reasons the West specifically should do this. Second point is substantive. Why, why sanctions are just terrible. Okay, so first of all, like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, what do you mean actually with working with, right? If they don't listen to you, are you going to reimpose sanctions? What if you're going to do if this new government turns out to be not so liberal?
So point two, I would say, is why like liberal developments are likely and good. That will be addressed there. Okay, so why are sanctions terrible and not working? So first of all, they rarely have an effect on leadership, right? Specifically in this case, where the new leader is backed by the military. It is unlikely the military government is going to be really screwed over when we apply sanctions, right? They have guns, they can seize things from people if they desperately need them. Sanctions generally do not affect ruling classes. It just hurts people who have not made any active choice to instate this terrible government. We think this is bad. We think it is good when people have enough money to buy the things they need to survive. And specifically, we think you are punishing people illegitimately for something they did not do. Thirdly, we think it is likely that when you have a new, unstable, insecure military government, and you sanction them further, no thank you, and you take away most chances of legitimate earnings of income, you make it far more likely they will just seize things and try to exert more power over the citizens of the country if they can't do any internationally. Second reason that sanctions are terrible, as I just briefly touched on, it is likely to just provoke more extreme things that already happened. Like, there was already a military coup. We know extreme things are likely to happen in Zimbabwe. I think if you can further remove like any chance of other ways of getting legitimacy and the international scale of money, I think it's just more likely they feel like there's a full military takeover and more power vested in the government. And we also think it gives if there's the UK, the US, other colonial regimes like screwing over the economy of the country, it gives a really good excuse for the government of a former colonial country to like seize power and position that as a response to the colonial West, rather than as in opposition to liberal democracy. So second point, thank you. Second point, why are liberal reforms likely and good? So first of all, I think the fact that Robert Mugabe was deposed shows that to some extent the military government is actually anti-nepotism and like to some extent in favor of good things happening to people, right? They're anti him like putting his wife in power. They're anti him like randomly seizing land. They are to some extent in favor of the citizenry of their country having their lives improved in some way. This means that it is likely that they will respond to talks with Western countries that are likely to lead them towards like better trade, increased economic development, and also we think like to some extent the fact that they got rid of a dictatorial leader means they might to some extent already have some sympathy for democracy. We think obviously we think like liberal reforms are good because people being able to choose what happens to them in their lives through voting is good. I think a right to self-determination is something all humans have. And finally, there's like weird world where if sanctions did somehow lead to a nominal idea of democracy. First of all, we think that if the sanctions did lead to democracy and the opposition party became a viable contender and ran in an election, then it is really unlikely the opposition party wins, right? Because they've been backed by Western regimes that have been systematically screwing people over, taking away the money that lets them buy things they need to live, right? They are affiliated with starvation, with absolute poverty. It could be really unlikely to vote for them, which means that you don't have first of all, you don't have a legitimate opposition. Like, you don't have what you're describing. We have some alternative to vote for. Because if there is no or very little chance that the opposition will win, then the legitimate opposition is essentially a single party contest. Secondly, it makes it really tricky for the West to actually engage with them in the future. If we have a party if the party in power is one that we massively fund the opposition to, that's going to get pretty tricky for us engaging in the international community. The international community is good. It provides human rights protections. It provides international trade. It provides bodies for conflict resolution, especially useful in countries that just had a military coup. These are good things. And secondly, we think that most likely, if you get democracy first, which is our claim, I think I've proven, you are likely to get an opposition coming from democracy. So when people realise that they can actually have a say in their government, if they realise there is nobody they can vote for except the current power, parties are likely to form. Parties are likely to form because there are already loose associations of people who exist. There are tribal associations, there are religious associations, that are likely to form those in some way into an opposition party. Because we think that you don't get democracy it is more likely to get democracy on our side, because we think that sanctions in general are an illegitimate way to challenge power, and because we think that most likely we will have an opposition once we form democracy anyway, we would like you to vote aside the opposition. Thank you.
Do you want me to keep the stream going, or should I pause?
Oh, yeah. We inside OP are not defending a policy of only sanctions. All the many points the previous speaker brought about how sanctions alone don't work, we don't have to defend any of that because we're doing a two-pronged approach. Doing one, sanctions, and two, supporting the opposition. Those two go together. I'll explain more on how. First of all, sanctions have actually worked because they work broadly in this two-pronged approach. In Iran, we had a not quite democratic, but at least a credible choice between two candidates. And partly because of the sanctions, partly because Iranians wanted to align more closely with the West, they wanted to get with the times, they picked the pro-negotiation, pro-Western candidate. This stuff has worked before. Only there, we didn't go in and directly support the guy who's now president of Iran. We just sanctioned and let them know that having free and fair elections would be a generally good thing in their negotiation when they come to the negotiating table with us. Second, because Zimbabwe has a more starved opposition than Muslim, we're going to go in and financially support and organizationally support, for example, training, education, what have you. We will talk with specific opposition parties that we need to help them find out what do you need to actually be a credible threat to power to the ZANU-PF. So because we have the starved opposition, it makes sense to also go in and support them directly. Second, as also raised in the POI, Zimbabweans don't have self-determination, so the entire point about self-determination is irrelevant because you don't have self-determination. You can elect the ZANU-PF or the ZANU-PF. The point of an opposition is that you can choose your course. You can go to the leader of your country and say, look, I don't like the course that you're going, so either do it better, or I'm going to go support the other guy. Whereas if you only have one party, you can at worst threaten to not vote, but that doesn't matter because there's no one else who could outnumber the ZANU-PF in votes. So even if you don't vote, you don't actually have any leverage. Meaning that if the ZANU-PF, despite their new presence, despite the new impression of a brave new world, decide to not pursue the smartest policies or not pursue the policies that most benefit the Zimbabwean people, the Zimbabwean people don't have any leverage. They don't have any way to counteract that. So that's what my partner was talking about. We talked about the marginal gains of investment in Zimbabwe from the West. Maybe you're right. Maybe they aren't marginal gains, but they're never going to be as big as the gains that could be had when the Zimbabwean people had leverage to steer the ZANU-PF away from bad policy because they had a credible threat to their power, saying, if you don't go away from this bad policy, which is hurting our economy, we will elect someone else. You'll never be able to threaten them. That is why uniquely, most importantly of all, is having a counterparty. Even if that counterparty turns out to not be that great, just the fact that you can pressure them and say, we'll give power to someone else means they will perform better. But I will get into who specifically we're going to support. But, am I going to do that now? No, almost. I was briefly mentioning, yeah, Mugabe was a nut, completely. By all accounts, he lost most of his sanity in the last 10 years, but it was still basically a one-man state, so no one was able to depose him. Which is why, sanctions in this particular case didn't work against this one guy. Because it's one thing, you can generally hurt the economy of the country, but it's much harder to really hurt the economy of one man. Whereas now, where you have power spread at least a little more between the army and the president's palace, who, as you mentioned, the army seemed more willing to talk because the army has seen the negative effects that ZANU-PF's policies and the sanctions have done, so they now have an incentive to go against it. Yeah, sure.
When you say you're going to aid the opposition, you mean just shoving them a bunch of money or also giving them arms, weapons?
No, there will be no guns. No guns. There will be money. There will, if need be perhaps training in how to run an efficient campaign, how to negotiate, all this kinds of stuff. But we are specifically not going to have any guns because we don't want an armed opposition. He wants a democratic opposition. But I'll just go into that opposition now. One of the benefits of this policy is that we can cherry pick the opposition. We can pick the people who, of their own drip, of their own means, if they had the power, would actually go in and pass the same policies the SideGov wants to go. If SideGov wants to, I don't know, liberalize the farming industry in Zimbabwe or whatever, then we can go in and pick the guys in Zimbabwe who are actually pro-liberalizing the farming policy. First of all, this is great because means we give this, the impression of someone who is able to, in the terms of typical Zimbabweans, explain to Zimbabweans why it's a good idea, rather than just having the ZANU-PF twist their arm, and the ZANU-PF guy goes out half-heartedly and says, the West really do it, so we'll do it, don't worry guys, we'll get some money. Instead, you'll have the guy coming out of the president's palace who's totally pumped about liberalizing farming markets. He's going to be able to sell it much better than the people who, by their own party manifesto, don't like free markets. It turns out, when you leave people who hate the free market in terms of administering a free market, they don't do a very good job. Because they're only doing it if you're twisting their arm. So it's more likely they will know both how to sell it and how to implement it better, because they understand, one, the benefits of the policy, and two, the way to sell it and implement it to the Zimbabwean people. So that is the benefits of sort of cherry picking the people who would broadly support the policies that SideGov wants, while also maintaining the benefits of the democratic opposition. And my second point is that not bolstering the opposition doesn't create a civil war. The opposition is always there. All dictatorships have a risk of having a civil war. But not listening to the opposition, not listening to your power base, who might actually have more power, unlike what you said, can potentially create a civil war. Which is why it makes sense to make the opposition now well-funded enough and well-organized enough that they can pose a threat to ZANU-PF's power today. So that they will have to either cede power to them or at least take on some of their policies. Meaning that you then strengthen this opposition, get these policies through, and avoid this animosity where you just give them what they want and then they don't come back later with some guns. Because they are still perfectly able to obtain guns, whether or not we in the West support them with them. Can get guns in Central Africa, it's not that hard. So not hearing the opposition creates a civil war. So we will force them to hear the opposition. And with that, I will close.
I think what this debate needs is a bit of nuance and a clear picture of what Zimbabwe, the opposition currently in power, actually looks like. Good thing that I've lived there, so I can provide that. I'm going to do that through 3 points. One, we agree with OG that sanctions are bad. I'm going to show that if you want to use sanctions, they work better as a threat than a carrot. That's our main point, and will directly clash with Op's way of using sanctions. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why cultural benefits of economic development is essential in order to get democratic development in the country. This sort of link to democratic development that was missing in OG's case. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about why you won't plausibly get the regime change that they want on side Op, which is why their best case probably won't happen and what their best case will look like. So I'm going to talk about plausible scenarios there. And I'm going to reduce sort of their pipe dream into rubble. Before that, one point here I'd like to add. Why West? We heard good arguments from OG. Of course, the most important reason for why the West should do this is because we are the strongest trading partner. Hence, we have the highest impact of sanctions or no sanctions. And that is the main reason why the West should do it. So going into the first point then, why sanctions in this case work much better as a threat than a carrot. And it's nice that they mention Iran because that sort of exemplifies this, right? Iran was trading with the West, and then they imposed sort of cracked down on the pro-West factions in the country. The West introduced sanctions. They changed their mind. Like it was the threat of the economic harm of sanctions that made them change their mind. The problem is here is that there are already sanctions and have been for a long time on Zimbabwe. That is the status quo. This means that there isn't a threat of worsening situations. The situation is already bad. What happens then when you lift it? Why does it become a threat then? Because when you lift sanctions, economic development happens, as was explained OG. What that means with regards to sanction working is that people start getting jobs, right? People start having their lives start looking better in several ways. That means the threat of imposing sanctions means a threat of removing these jobs. These people will not want to remove jobs. Generally, people dislike loss more than they might, be in favor of some vague possible gain of the future, right? So these people will put pressure on their governments not to lose these jobs. Right? So when you got the job, you're more scared of it being removed than their promise of if you support the opposition, might get you a job in the future through lifting sanctions. Secondly, the fact that we're more humane when we apply the threat of sanctions instead of actually applying sanctions. And they said that Zimbabwe is poor. I want to talk to 3 areas of why this is immensely important. A, there's a food crisis in Zimbabwe. The previous breadbasket of Southern Africa is now one of the most starved countries in the world. Second, and I'll go into reasoning that in my third point. Secondly, there's an AIDS crisis with amongst, I think 20 to 30% of the population having AIDS. They need medicine, and they need specifically the economic ability to buy medicine for poor people, or at least the government spending it for them, right? Thirdly, there's a drug crisis, specifically along the South African border, which needs to be dealt with. All that costs money. All that is something that is worsened by poverty. This is not something that they can ignore and say, well, you got to crack some eggs for the sanctions to work. These are real people whose lives are hard, that they have on their side, and we don't. We're proud to not have it on our side. So thank you. So going then into our second point, the cultural benefits of economic development. All right. So in Africa and in Southern Africa, there's a notion of the patriarch as a strong leader who supports Robert Mugabe. A, he got independence from the country by leading a movement to oust the Brits. B, he has the sort of aura of being old, of being part of sort of the patriarchal image of an old leader, right? That is why Jacob Zuma, who might be more powerful as the president of South Africa, is reluctant to call him out, because on that status level, he is lower, right? Africa is not homogeneous. Where is this type of notion, this type of attitude the strongest? In the countryside, right? Where they have similar patriarchal structures in their local villages, in their in their local families, right? So what is happening how does it look like there? Well, a lot of ZANU-PF support is in the rural areas of Zimbabwe. That's where you have followers. These have been rewarded under Mugabe by giving them land from previous rich white owners, right? An average newspaper reading citizen would know all this because it's been in the papers. So what does that mean? That means that these people are the ones who support Mugabe, mainly Mugabe based on the structure. They don't necessarily have that same support for others, right? Where is it weak? It's weak, this idea, in the cities. In the cities where there's more likely for people to believe in the notions of liberalism, the notions of democracy, and these ways of ruling the country, these ways of having, of sorting power, right? Why does this matter? Well, when you strengthen trade by removing sanctions, you strengthen the economic power of cities. As it currently is, even though they can't feed themselves completely, they're still very much dependent on the food coming from farms. And the relative power is within the hands of the ZANU-PF supporters. When you strengthen cities, you strengthen the opposition. That is a mechanism to strengthen the power of the people wanting democratic change in the country. I'll take closing if you have it.
So I don't think that people who are right now jobless and starving don't really notice the fact they are jobless and starving. Don't you think that's enough of a bad situation in order to leverage the president in order to actually do something?
We're saying that a vague claim that if we remove sanctions you will get a job can easily be spun and said that that's not likely, that won't happen, compared to having removed sanctions, gotten a job, and then having the claim that this could be taken away from you is much more of a clear causal mechanism. So why then won't you get necessarily the regime change they want on their side? Well, there are 3 basic scenarios of how this could play out. A, they get their opposition. Well, what opposition is that? They haven't talked about it because they don't want to talk about it. The opposition in Zimbabwe is Morgan Tsvangirai. He's been the opposition for 20 years. He is the leader of the opposition movement. The problem with that is he is in a lot of ways similar in authority as Mugabe. Of course, to a much less extent, but within his movement, he has a lot of absolute power, a lot of criticism of that. Right? There's a few checks on his power. The problem, of course, with this is by empowering him, you're empowering the same kind of structures. Just because he gets into power doesn't mean he's the nice guy that they're hoping for. And remember, that's their best case. Of course, they could say, well, we're going to fund others or so forth, but then they're splitting the movement. And all the while, they'll be looking as a puppet of the West who's imposing the will of the West. Secondly, they could get no regime change. And that's the status quo with all the harms that we're talking about. Or you get the drastic measures when the opposition sort of and the ZANU-PF in the country get armed to put them down. Lastly, you can get the worst regime change. Why? Because ZANU-PF isn't homogeneous either. There's still a strong Mugabe fan base there that could take power and exchange the government. For these reasons, we proudly stand in favor of lifting sanctions.
Your final official.
Yeah, sure. My third time. Yeah, the camera lost me. Is that on tape? Thank you, Bethany. 3 points of extensions today. First of all, how do these sanctions actually work? Secondly, why do they specifically work now? And thirdly, why is strengthening the dictatorship right now equally bad? And why it's also the same reason why the sanctions maybe have worked in the past, right? So a few points, 1 point of context and 1 point of rebuttal. The first thing is that they ask us, who are you going to support on the opposition side? Are you going to support Swaziland? We say we do not really care who we support because the incentives we give to the people by imposing these sanctions are the same for all parties, right? We do not necessarily care who of the opposition takes these incentives the right way, or perhaps that the government will do this in order to prevent these cause these sanctions to be lifted. We believe the party that will do that is the good party, and we will explain why. Secondly, 1 point of rebuttal, right? So what closing government says is that sanctions only work as a threat, right? And they say it's much better in order to liberalize the economy than have some jobs and then threaten to take them away. We might be inclined to slightly believe this, but on the entire prop bench, they haven't given any analysis how this procedure of liberalization equals jobs actually works, right? It's just some kind of magic. They say you liberalize, you get some jobs, and that's it, right? We do not buy into this notion. We will explain how. That's why we will win the debate. And we do not think like a couple of jobs. We simply believe that it's not happening, right? So how do sanctions work? It's actually quite simple, right? Because we think the most important thing here are economic sanctions, right? We believe that there's no sanctions on AIDS medicine being shipped into Zimbabwe, but then again, it's hard to get AIDS medicine into South Africa and other democratic states anyway. So we don't really say that that's the most important part of the sanctions. But economic sanctions in this region are quite important. Why? For example, Zimbabwe has a lot of diamonds. Diamonds are very nice. Westerners love diamonds, and they're very expensive. Your country can get very rich from exporting these diamonds, right? This is what Botswana, neighboring Zimbabwe, actually have done. Invested heavily in the diamond industry, done this in a proper way, and got quite rich by Southern African side, right? Zimbabwe cannot do that, right? The fact that you can't export diamonds from Zimbabwe is a major harm to the economy, right? You can't really sell these diamonds to the Zimbabweans because most Zimbabweans are more interested in things like food and that kind of stuff. They don't really have much use for diamonds. This massively impacts the economy, right? Why is this relevant and why does this actually work in this case? What we say, this gives to all government parties, all parties involved in the system, a huge incentive in order to change something right now, right? We believe that Mugabe was never very inclined to do this in the first place, right? There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it's still ideology. We all tend to forget that Mugabe was nominally communist, and in the 1980s this was quite popular. So working together with Westerners from an ideological point of view wasn't very beneficial, right? Closing Gov also tells how Mugabe is still very much revered for having repelled the Westerners from Rhodesia, which is actually quite a nice feat. I mean, whatever happened after that might be not so nice, but that's a different debate, right? But we say the moment that the power vacuum occurs, all actors involved need some way to establish their power, right? We could say that there are parties who could simply say, well, I try to be as repressive as possible. I try to be a dictator, and I try to use the old systems, right? We'll also explain why this policy, the status quo, only strengthens, the prop mechanism only strengthens these kind of initiatives that people have. But we say to anyone who is willing to export these diamonds, this huge pile of money that Zimbabwe is actually sitting on, to export them in a proper and a liberal way, has potentially a huge power base in order to sell to the Zimbabwean people. And the Zimbabweans know this because the sort of intuitive mechanism, we have a lot of diamonds, we can sell them for a lot of gold, not gold, that's pretty ancient, a lot of money, is something that comes very intuitive to a lot of Zimbabweans. So all people who are involved in this kind of power struggle have the same incentive in order to say, if I can get a deal with the Westerners to export these diamonds in a humane and a proper way, which is the only way that it can get the sanctions on the diamond trade lifted, that is the moment that these people have the same incentive in order to say, hey, maybe we do that. Maybe I can win the Zimbabwean population for me if I actually liberalize this diamond trade and actually change it. And really, this is the way that liberalization actually works, right? But that's not everything. Let's say your closing first.
The point is, the only reason Mugabe was removed from power was because he couldn't fix the economy. The current regime can't fix the economy. Why can't Mugabe come back?
That's the point. Fixing the economy is very easy. If you want to fix the economy, you need to liberalize and need to show to the West we have actually changed. We control this, and we can look into how the Zimbabwean actually do the reforms, how they actually manage the diamond economy. And if they still mess it up, we say, well, we simply won't trade with you anymore. We should give all people involved a very clear alternative how to fix the economy, which is actually liberalization and being nice to the Zimbabwean people. And that for a lot of people involved in the power struggle is very nice, right? But how does this actually play into the idea how this has worked in the past, right? We believe that the moment that you say to a dictatorial government, you can use the diamond trade or use any kind of other trade freely and then liberalize the economy, we believe this simply will not necessarily happen, right? First of all, the systems that of this dictatorship are still in place, right? So if you want to get really rich in the diamond trade, a very efficient way in order to do this is simply to try to get into the diamond trade and nationalize the diamond trade, for example. Then get the same henchmen who supported Mugabe, who are still part of the system and not always work for Mugabe, actually bribe them in order to make sure you keep this monopoly for the diamond trade, in order to give you the most profit by having the people of Zimbabwe work in these mines, work for terrible wages, totally exploiting them, right? It's not necessary. There is no reason why a new dictatorship that has grown up into the system of dictatorship where abuse of violence has been very much normalized wouldn't choose this and would simply say, oh yeah, I'll liberalize it, there's no real incentive for me to do so, but I'll do it anyway, right? So I believe that is something that very much happens, right? We see that this also leads to massive amounts of corruption, right? If you actually keep this dictatorial government in place, that means that everyone who wants to be an undertaker, now that's something different an entrepreneur, that's the word I'm looking for. Everyone who wants to be an entrepreneur has as first priority is in order to get in good footing with the government, right? The moment that you still say you can do this in a dictatorial way, the economy will be very efficient. Diamonds will be exported, but still all the money will be lined to the pockets of the Westerners getting diamonds, and the government actually exploiting the people, right? Other business can also thrive because they have the same incentives in order to please the dictator and not have a liberal free market in which competition and actually doing things efficiently supports them, right? So I believe that is simply the case that we are having here and why we win the debate, because we are the first ones to actually explain how these sanctions directly work, how you get the economy on track, and that's why we are very proud to oppose it.
Yeah, I know.
And I'd like to invite the government whip to close the speech for government time.
Okay, dear panel, one missing link in closing the opposition case. Firstly, yeah, you can argue that will be good and the diamonds will be really like giving a better condition in this country, but you never prove how a good opposition will emerge the victors and how the situation will be better step by step. In a comparative to that, Johan provide you how we can make a better economical condition, and we believe that in this debate, particularly food and increasing the poverty and increasing famine, it's more important than diamonds when the closing opposition try to prove in this debate. What I want to prove in this debate is that the priority in this debate is a better quality of life. We don't care about the system in this short term. We caring about these people, and I think that it's better to make it a pressure for citizens than for opposition or the government who are not fully involved and not living in this particular country. We show you why we have direct impact and why we're filling the gaps on the OG giving this debate. We show you from which factors coming the self-determination and talking about the sanctions, and also we're giving one additional benefit about the politics situation and specific in this area. So let's focus on my first point, like why the quality of life is the most important part in this particular debate. If you want making a social change in a country, you must give them people like a lack of better conditions. If you're lifting the sanction, they feeling some real change, and they know because how comes that? It's a more trade, yes. You have a cheaper goods, you can deal with the people. It's a more job places. Specific for people from rural conditions, when they never heard about the diamonds, they only wanted food. It's cheap food, or the place when you can buying a food and you can working to making a money to buying this food. So it's talking about if they feeling that they have some help, they have some goods directly, they do be better economical fear because before losing this and we come back to the previous situation where they don't like, and it's the stronger incentive, a stronger imperative for these people. We think that this short-term benefit, creating a long-term change when people be more involving to believing in liberalism and more involving in the long term to the democracy. But why we priority the basic needs under the democracy? Because it's not depends from the system when you're living. Even if with authority, even if with democracy, you still must have a better condition for your life. If your basic needs are provided, you are better citizens, you are more happy, and you are more likely to dealing with your government, you are more likely to understanding the actions what actually happen. You are more likely to be living in Western liberal values, and you are more likely to changing your country from a down to the top. So we strongly believe that this is a mechanism of self-determination to providing basic needs, providing a food, and changing the quality of living, especially these people from the rural areas. In this specific case, we don't care who will be in authority, that will be Mugabe or a different guy. We don't care which system will be. We much more care about the people who are living there. Even if we provide the democracy in the long term, it's good, additional benefit for our case. But we strictly give a direct impact why this sanction in this specific way, like Johan provided you, are working. We show you why they will be working also in this area. Also, like opening opposition case, it's like opposition is good because it's opposition. So if now it's a bad situation, if we give a power to the opposition, situation will be better. We will have a fair system, and it doesn't change the citizen in this way. We'll be creating democracy in this country. So again, we never heard about that, but we still believe that the perception of the society, the perception of looking on the Western values, on the quality of living, it's more important than any system will provide the both opposition teams. So let's talk just a little bit about OG and CG and why we are clearly beat there in this debate. Firstly, we show you step by step how to increase the poverty. What's a really problem? Because if it's a poverty, you don't think rational. You're a citizen who don't believe in any government because you are here and you have family, you have your small rural community, and you don't care about international trade. But if this trade provides you some benefits, you are more likely to believe that you are more likely to changing something and to decrease like food crisis. It will be better for your medicine, and we can also decrease like drug prices to giving the people legal options and giving them more power to changing their life. So that's the first clear impact in our, we're giving like people better life, and and we think that it's a stronger incentive, a stronger pressure for every citizen before losing this is the most important thing in this debate. Also, another thing who brings from CG, it's like cultural benefits, and we're showing like even if we'll be still like patriarchy structure, even if we still some local problems, situation be better, and we be more likely to liberalization and to have a relative power in a long-term perspective. We think that it's this debate is about a step-by-step to creating changes. Also, like third point, what we bring to in this debate, like specific in SCG, is about the change-changing regime, and we show you how we can make it a more influential for these people in a possible scenario. I close.
Yeah, I see that you love democracy and liberalism, but how does actually having a state-owned company that exploits its own population actually benefit the economy of ordinary Zimbabweans?
Okay, first, lifting sanction giving them more opportunities and more trade with the player like it's the Western liberal democracy. But even if it will be not huge impact, it's still step by step. It's every day can be some additional benefits. It's still more plausible that our scenario with a food and decreased famine it's still more possible than the diamonds and economic developing in a CO case. So to the end of this debate, we show you and we prove you why in this specific area the quality of living and step by stepping, giving a pressure for the people and giving them feeling fear before losing something what they already try to find, like the basic needs, the money what they need to survive, not diamonds to be a rich country, just to living every day by day. Even if we're not making a change in the system, even if they're not making change in the party, if they're changing the quality of living these people, we want this debate.
I'd like to thank you both for very bright speeches by the opposition with both the debate for opposition side and in this debate whole.
Are you fine with this, Jim?
Sure.
So we think that the entire government bench basically fails to do in this debate is try to explain that the economy getting better means the Zimbabweans' lives getting actually better. Right? They try to explain to you that by economic benefits and by letting these people have a good economy, that liberalization will automatically happen because people will see that they have a chance of losing their jobs and therefore will go more likely to leverage their government. It's however unclear to us how so many Zimbabweans get those jobs in the first place. Right? When Yossi explains to you that when you unconditionally allow a country to actually exploit their people, to oppress minorities, and to go on with just doing whatever the fuck they want to do, but still giving them economic benefits, there is literally no reason for them to actually help ordinary Zimbabweans, right? What does that mean? That means that that group that they're talking about in closing government that realizes that they have a job and therefore realizing that the Spanish sanctions is a bad thing isn't important because that group is either incredibly small or never even comes to exist on their side of the house because they never explain it, right? What am I going to do in my speech? I'm going to do a bit of rebuttal, a little bit more on OG, just a few extra remarks that might be important, and mostly on closing government. And then I'm going to talk about our extension, why it was important, and kind of. Okay, so I'm going to just start with closing government, because that's fresh in our minds. So basically what we hear is the idea that threatening sanctions is better than actually doing sanctions. I think it also gives a few responses to this already, but I have a few extra responses. So we see, first of all, we already see that huge amounts of people are angry at the government about the fact that they don't have jobs, right? Are angry about the fact that they are starving. This is the reason that there are a lot of people in misery in Zimbabwe who did stand up against wasn't enough for a long amount of time because there was a certain ideology that we found very important. But we did see that there was a lot of protests going on, and a lot of people who were angry, right? Second of all, if they say, oh, people people don't know about the fact now that sanctions affect them, but when the sanctions are threatened, suddenly they will know that sanctions are the things that affect them, right? They're going to take this offensive line and say that people in Zimbabwe don't know about international trade and have no idea what's going on in politics. They're not going to know the moment that they do have a job. They're still not going to know that the threat of sanctions is going to take away their job, right? You can't have it both ways around. We say especially now, because the government isn't going to literally tell Zimbabweans, hey guys, remember, there's going to be sanctions soon maybe, and if they happen, you're going to lose your job. We don't think this is going to happen. And if it does happen, it happens on our side of the house as well, right? There's people telling Zimbabweans, hey, if we lift these sanctions, you're probably going to have money. We think most people know that money is a good thing, you know, the diamond trade is a good thing, etc. Fifth of all, like, these sanctions haven't been around that long, right? It's not like the people were, that they were, like, put into place 100 years ago and people don't even remember these sanctions ever happening. There were people with jobs who lost their jobs because of these sanctions, right? These people do remember, right? The North remembers. They do remember that these sanctions were put into place. So we don't think that it's true that people have somehow forgotten that these sanctions ever existed or have taken away these jobs. So this clearly doesn't stand. They also say, well, you never explain how liberalization happens. Well, literally we kind of do, right? You think of what happens in your side of the house is you say, jobs happen, liberalization happens. What do we explain here? We tell you that the political party right now, that there's a sort of vacuum, right? There's no more ideology really left. The political party right now who basically get the money gets the votes, right? We think that the most simple way to get votes, and we're going to go kind of assume that there will be some sort of election process, especially if we do support the opposition, if we do support the party who wants to get those votes, we say the people who gets the money gets the votes. What does that mean? That means at the moment that we tell these people, the way you can get money is by fulfilling the conditions that we give to you, and then we'll lift these sanctions. That's the way that we actually get them to do what we want, right? So we tell them, for example, hey, maybe stop pressing minorities, maybe start listening to your people, right? The moment that we actually set these conditions and say to a party, however bad they may be, like, intrinsically, we think at the moment that they listen to us and say, okay, we will start treating our people fair, we will start doing better working conditions, so that we can have this economic boost. We say this is a much better thing to do, right? Sure.
Why am I naive always saying that it does create jobs? The people who lost their jobs to sanctions remember that, but you're not sure you particularly will get the new job. But if you have one, you're sure you will lose it. That's the difference.
So we're pretty sure that OO doesn't say everybody's going to get jobs, right? They say there might be some economic development, some people might get jobs, but we don't think this is enough. We agree with that in closing opposition, right? We say it's never going to be enough to have an incredible amount of people to, on your side of the house, have the leverage that you want in order to actually create the liberalization that you want, right? We don't think OO ever says Zimbabwe's going to be rich now, but we don't care. Like, definitely not, right? I think this is a step. Okay, I kind of forgot what the second part of the thing was a consent, so maybe if I have time, I'll ask the second part again. Sorry. Okay, so a little bit more reactions to opening government. So they basically say, the military does kind of care about their people, so it's going to be fine. You know, they do kind of care, and they're going to give leeway. We say, if this is true, it's going to be easy for them to live up to the conditions of our sanctions, right? If this is true, that means that they can just do the things that we tell them to do, and then we'll lift the sanctions, right? Sanctions aren't something that is permanent. Sanctions is something you put on a country when you tell them, do these things, or we put sanctions on you. They don't do the things, you put sanctions on them. They start doing the things, you take them up again. Kind of simple thing. So the moment that they are the loving militaries, people that you claim that they shouldn't be a problem, right? If we think on our side of the house, you need a little bit of a push, you need a little bit of a push of the economic stability in order. Okay, so the second part.
You still haven't shown why you want to either empower Morgan Tsvangirai, an autocrat, or split the opposition movement, and why if they're split, they'll be able to take power.
Actually, Ilse has literally explained this, right? We say we don't really care that much who the person is in the end who takes the power. We say we care that the person who takes the power lives up to the conditions that we tell them to, and I can't repeat this enough, right? We say that the conditions that we put on these sanctions are so incredibly important that we don't even care that much if the person who comes into power might have been an exploitative monster in the past, might have been an ideological nightmare in the past. We say if he lives up to our standards, it's already a lot better than in the status quo, right? We say, for example, things like just a fair democratic process, fair democratic elections are all incredibly important things that we tell you they have to live up to, right? Which means that in the end, whoever we support, that's probably the most important. Okay, so on to our extension. So we think OO tells us, right? That's what you'll say. We think OO tells us what some important things about how the opposition to keep the government in check, but they're still a little bit vague about how this democratic control exactly works, and why we say, and they kind of ignore the sanctions part of the entire debate, right? We tell you a few things on sanctions. We tell you first of all how they work, why they will work in this instance, giving you like crucial context about Zimbabwe, giving you crucial context as to why these parties are more likely to listen than they were before. We explain to you, for example, Mugabe right now is much more likely, not Mugabe, sorry, Mugabe right now is much more likely to listen because he has to actually keep the companies around him, for example, happy, because he's put under much more pressure from companies because we say Mugabe was in a much more ideological strong position. For example, he had friends supporting him because they liked his character, liked how strong he was, etc. We say Mugabe does not have that character, does not have that ideology. He has to keep the companies around him happy, and he has to actually listen to us in order to get the power that he wants, and the opposition has to do the same. Therefore, we say the party who actually adheres to our conditions that we explain to you why they're good is the party that we want in government. Thank you very much.
Please take all of your papers with you and please, because we close round.